Hello, my friends, and welcome to We the Game Changers. I'm your host, Beth Knox, and today I'm talking with Mary Kipp, CEO of Puget Sound Energy. Hi, Mary. I am so glad that you have joined us today. This has been I love the diversity of guests that we've had on the podcast, and this is really fun to have you here.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Oh, excellent. So let's just set the stage for our listeners and viewers. So you grew up on a cattle farm in New Mexico with early environmentalism and being a good steward of the land that was instilled by your family. You got a law school degree, but you also have a theater background. I want to touch on that in a bit. Then you joined El Paso Electric and moved within that company for 12 years, but leaving as the CEO. And then you came to Washington to be in that same role at Puget Sound Energy. Now you've been in that CEO position for 6 years now, right? So you've been implementing some of the most ambitious climate policies in the nation, all while prioritizing service to residents, physical safety and long-term well-being of thousands of employees, many of whom are out in the field, which adds a complexity to it. And, P.S. also mitigating wildfire risk. So this is a massive undertaking that you have on your plate, Mary, and I imagine it's a never-ending journey of just trying to hit these new benchmarks, right? So talk to me about what helps you metaphorically keep putting one foot in front of the other to tackle these really audacious goals and dealing with those day-to-day requirements and obligations that you have.
Yeah, well, I'll start with something that's actually not metaphorical but real, and that is our employee base.
Yes.
They are so talented, so committed. There's kind of in the industry, it's known that utility employees really care deeply about our customers, and I've never seen that more than here at PSE. And like you said, there's so many different things that we have to do. I clearly don't have expertise in most of them, and certainly not all of them. So we just have people who really know what they're doing and really care deeply. You talked about all of the challenges we're facing. You know, years ago, utilities have always had challenges, but it's nothing like we're facing today. I've been doing this for about 30 years, and I can tell you that looking back on things that seemed challenging at the time, maybe we would face one every 5 years. Now we're facing 5 in 1 year.
Wow.
And on top of all the things you mentioned is cost to customers, right? Because all of these things cost money, so we have to be really, really efficient to make sure we're helping our customers keep their bills down in this inflationary environment as much as possible. But there are a couple of things that keep me going. One is, as you said, my background and the way I grew up. Growing up on a ranch, my dad was a huge environmentalist. It's a very interesting situation. We didn't even have access to the power grid, right? So we had a generator, and we didn't have a phone. We read a lot. We spent a lot of time outdoors. It was a really, really great way to grow up. But it made me have a connection to nature that is just such an integral part of who I am, that I feel like we have to do everything we can to take care of this planet. To use a sports metaphor, we've got to leave it all on the field, right? This one's hugely, hugely important. And then the second thing is just a belief that whatever we're doing in life, leave it better than we found it, right? So whether it's trying to help PSE move to the next level, or trying to help my officer team or employees or the community in which we live, all of these things, those keep me going. And what better thing is there to do with your life than to try to make things just a little bit better? So on the days when I feel like, are we really making progress? Are we actually sliding backwards? You know, are we doing right by our customers? Are we doing right by our employees? Are we living up to our values? I try to always think back on those things. And some days I'm more successful than others, because we're all human, right?
Exactly.
So some days it's easy to put your socks on in the morning, and some days it's kind of like, But having, I think, something that's bigger than ourselves, no matter what you do, is so critically important.
Well, it becomes that North Star that absolutely keeps the motivation in place. And, and as you said, when it's kind of in your DNA, then you don't have to force that motivation, right?
No.
It's even, sure, days are tough and we all have them, but it's not like that goes away in the meantime. The thing that is just part of your North Star.
Absolutely. And every once in a while, because we're human, we get distracted by other things, and we may need a little bit of a reset. So in those times, I think it's just important to kind of reflect, meditate, think about what matters to you, and actually take a moment of quiet in this world in which we're constantly barraged with every kind of information there is. So just get in a quiet space. Here we're so lucky because we have the most amazing nature in the world. So just getting out into that is a perfect way to reset.
I think that's so true. And I do find if I have to almost schedule regular kind of North Star check-ins because it is so easy to get distracted, not only with, as you say, the barrage of incoming data, but sometimes there are so many great opportunities. And in the sports world right now, there are just, it's like it's coming at me all the time. And it's really easy to want to chase after all of them. So, and I'm sure you have great opportunities as well that come your way, or things that distract you in a positive way, but does it keep you on the path that is going to be the most effective and also manage your bandwidth of energy in the most effective way?
Absolutely. And because you mentioned sports, and that's what we're here about, sports are also a great way to be in the moment and to recharge, whether it's watching a sporting event. How many times are you just lost in what's going on the field? Or doing a sport too, right? You have to be in the moment to do a sport and do it effectively. So those are other great ways to recharge too, and a huge part of my life.
Absolutely, I agree with that. Okay, so good leaders are consistent and generally have some basic beliefs that informs their leadership style. Tell us about the leadership, I'll call it the toolbox, the things that you reach into every day that informs how you go about your professional life and managing the team that you have.
Yeah, so in addition to the values that we talked about, which kind of serve as a foundation, there's obviously the idea that everyone needs to be treated with dignity and respect. So I try to always do that, and I think I succeed most of the time. Once again, we're all human. Maybe I fail from time to time, and I also expect that of everyone who works with me. My leadership style is collaboration. We have to respect each other. We have to share information. We have to be able to challenge each other's ideas in a respectful way, because that's actually how we solve some of these really big existential problems that we're facing today. So I think my most important job is to collaborate with my board and my team on setting strategy, to hire really talented people, excuse me, who are also really good people, good team players. I have to have team players on my team.
Right.
And many of the folks who work for me have done team sports, which is interesting as well.
There's a parallel.
And then I'm the coach. I keep them going. I enable them. But I also let them play their position. So an example is I have a guy named Aaron August. He came from PG&E. He is our Chief Customer and Strategy Officer. He's brilliant at what he does. And I could have picked anyone on my team. He just came to mind. But my job is to make sure Aaron has the tools he needs to do his job, that from time to time when he feels like he needs someone to bounce ideas off, that I'm there, and that I'm also there to advocate for him. And then let's say, he has a day that's a little off, it's to give some course correction. So I think being a CEO is very much like being a coach. And in terms of decision making, I think it's important to let the people you hire who are really talented make many of the day-to-day decisions. The decisions I as a CEO should be making are the big strategic decisions after consultation, as we talked about, and there shouldn't be a whole lot of those. We're talking less than 10 a year. So that's, I think, a big part of the role. And then, of course, trying to look around corners to see what is that next existential threat. How do we guard against it? How do we stay core and focused on what matters to us, which is safe, reliable, affordable, and increasingly clean.
Yeah, that's a lot on your plate. And one of the things that I remember reading about you is that humility is something that you bring to your leadership style.
Thank you.
And I just was thinking about this this morning because I was at on a panel yesterday, and we were talking about the difference of having ego lead the way, which we all have to have ego to some degree as leaders, and when you bring humility to the table, And sometimes that can actually hold you back, not being authentic, because if we defer too much, being humble about our role and what we bring to the table, then we're leaving something behind. Can you talk to a little bit about that? I just think it's an interesting contrast.
I hadn't thought about sort of that tension and that dichotomy. I think there's a time to be assertive, and there's a time to say, I'm the CEO, here's the decision, and usually that follows a period of collaboration. But I think humility and being assertive are not at odds with one another. I think humility is once again something internal, recognizing I'm not perfect. I don't know many things, and there are people around me who are experts and know these things. And I think it's bringing that humility to say, you know what, you're an expert on this topic. Right. I'm going to be educated by you. I'm going to listen to you. Another big part of humility, and I think we need this more in today's world, is we need to be able to listen to people who we don't agree with the idea.
That's right.
And here's the hard part. We're open to having our mind changed. And that is a struggle. That is a work in progress for me, certainly. But that's what I think what humility is the ability to listen with respect, especially to people who we may think, I have nothing in common with you, and I'm right and you're wrong. It's actually opening up and recognizing the value.
I was just having a conversation on a previous episode with the CEO of Sub Pop Records, and Megan Jasper, and we were having that same conversation where we believe if we have an opposite belief than someone that we're talking to, that we have nothing in common. And she was sharing a story of someone that at her local favorite coffee shop, she ended up befriending this individual where they are absolute polar opposites on the political spectrum, and yet they have discovered all of these intersecting enjoyments and things in common that she said I never would have guessed that would be the case if I hadn't been open to finding the places that we have in common and separating the political beliefs. I just thought that we are so inclined to draw the line.
Yes.
And instead of looking for where do we have things in common, as opposed to highlighting what we don't.
I love that she did that, and I've heard stories of similarly, like people sitting on a plane next to someone and they quickly learn maybe politically they're at opposite ends of the spectrum, but then they find something in common, like they both like a certain sports team, or they both have a certain hobby, or whatever it may be. And I think we don't always need to agree, but I think if we can try to understand the other person's point of view, which can be admittedly really hard, and I'm very stubborn and opinionated, but it at least allows us to maybe find ways to move ahead. And we need so much healing as a country right now that I think that has to start at the individual basis. And it works great in business too, right?
Absolutely.
You've got to learn to work with people who are different from you.
It certainly applies across the board. So from what I understand, you have a leadership philosophy, and so correct me if this is not spot on, but that you're never going to get everyone. If you're driving change, there are going to be some people who don't like us, just playing off of what we just spoke to. So was this a leadership philosophy that you adopted early on? Did it evolve over time? Where did that come from?
I wish I could say I had adopted it early on, because I would have spent a lot less time persuading people who are unpersuadable. I think it's one of the benefits, we'll call it, of experience.
Yes.
I've spent a lot of time in my career working on people on the far side of an issue, only to learn that while I may be able to find common ground with them on some issues, we're never going to agree on whatever the key issue in front of us is. So it's better to work with people in the middle, the people who are undecided, or maybe the people who maybe aren't leaning with you, but through conversation and education you can bring along. Because there's always going to be about, and I'm making the number up, it's not a real statistic, but 10% of the population that no matter what you do, it's basically a waste of your time to try to persuade them of your point of view. And similarly, it's a waste of their time to try to persuade you.
Right.
So I've learned to work with the people who are more open-minded, persuadable, people who are curious. Yeah. Curiosity is a great thing. I'm a very curious person, and it makes my life much more interesting. So yeah, it's work with people who are persuadable.
one of my early mentors had, because I grew up on a farm in Michigan, so I was
there
that,
you go.
you know, I was still in that, you know, wanting to please everyone because we're all nice in the Midwest.
Of course.
And one of the things that my mentor told me, he was my boss at the time, said, this applies in different ways, but he said, Beth, you need to avoid the assholes. And
I love that.
it was so, and it just really resonated with
I'm
me.
stealing that
You
because
may.
that is a much more eloquent way of
Right?
saying what we were talking about.
Exactly. And, you know, I understood over time that, you know, I would spend so much energy worrying about what this individual was thinking, or why did they say that to me, or why aren't they, you know, joining forces with me. And when I could have been spending that energy on something productive or on someone who is ready to be persuaded and be involved. So it was such a valuable lesson, and it applies in so many different areas.
And it applies to so many women because of how we're socialized.
Yes.
You know, especially of our generation, we were taught to please and we were taught to be agreeable and all these things that aren't necessarily the best for us or for what we're trying to accomplish.
Right.
So I think having boundaries, you know, not spending your time on people who aren't persuadable or are assholes.
Right.
It's a good thing, right?
Exactly. So, Mary, I'm always interested in someone's leadership journey. In that, when did you know you were a leader? Did that evolve over time, or was there a moment when you said, "Whoa, I'm meant to be a leader in my career"?
Such a fascinating question. I've never thought about it that way, but I think there are all sorts of leaders, right? Like you can say the captain of a team, a CEO, you know, a general manager, whatever the case may be. Those are obvious leadership positions. But I think real leaders lead despite their position. It's the person who you find people looking to in a difficult situation for answers, that team member, or the person who steps up to do the extra work, or the person who, if someone on a team is suffering, they see that and try to bring along and do what they can for the common good and lift everyone up. And I think that is an attribute, right? And most of us aren't going to be lucky enough or unlucky enough, depending how you look at it, to become a CEO. Probably lucky. But we can all lead in the roles we're in. And I think it was probably after I got out of law school, I probably saw that more than ever, just that I tended to be a person who I wanted to help. I wanted to lift other people up, and I was fortunate that people trusted me to do that, and that, I think, is how I came on my journey, because I think that's what leadership is, right? Yeah,
exactly. I know it happened kind of, it surprised me, where I had a few moments, and I was in my mid-20s, when people would turn to me and say, "What do you think, Beth?" Or "What should we do, Beth?" And I would be looking around saying, "Me? You want me to make this decision?"
Yeah.
But I pretty quickly started embracing it and not questioning, why are they asking me to be this leader or make a decision? And because it felt natural at the same time. So I've always thought that's such an interesting process of how people come into their leadership journey.
You and I have a very similar experience in that way. It's more of like recognizing the attribute rather than, oh, I'm now XYZ, so I'm a leader.
Exactly, right, yeah. So your career has largely been at the helm of two major utility companies, first at El Paso Electric for 12 years and then PSE for 6 now. In a previous interview, you shared that you had resigned yourself to a career-ending role at El Paso Electric. What was that ladder climbing experience for you while you were there?
So what I was referring to is I worked at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. I prosecuted energy companies, and I needed to go back to El Paso for personal reasons. I was making a choice to put the personal above the career.
Okay.
And when I first went back to El Paso Electric, it was as their FERC lawyer, and I took a pay cut from my government job to do that. And when I got there, and El Paso is not this way now, and in fact they have a woman CEO who followed me, but it was all middle-aged white men. They seemed so old then, and now they seem so young.
Right.
Down at the other end of the hall, and I didn't feel like it was particularly, trying to have diverse thought, have different people in different roles, trying to move ahead on what we wanted to do. And that changed when an older white man came in and became CEO, and I judged him wrongly at first. I've also learned not to judge people by external attributes. And he really led the way towards helping on the clean energy transition. And so, I thought before Tom Shockley came in, I thought, well, I've done this for my family, and I'm just going to try to enjoy being a lawyer here as much as I can and lead in this little world of the legal department where I'm not even the most senior lawyer, and just do what I can.
Okay, so then how did it change for you, because you ultimately left that company as the CEO? So what changed in that duration?
Well, what changed is when Tom came in, Tom Shockley, and I realized, wow, he shares a lot of the values I share. He shares caring about the customer, assuming it's not material, non-public information that's illegal to disclose. What he would say to us who reported to him in his office is the same thing he said publicly. He shared the values of community. He shared the values of a reasonable path to clean energy. And I thought, I want to be in a role where I can influence something like this. So that's why I became CEO at El Paso. It wasn't to be the CEO title, anything like that. And then I came here because I felt like I could build on this. We have among the most aggressive clean energy laws in the nation. And I thought, if we can show we can be successful on this in Washington State without making it unreliable or unaffordable, it can be the beacon to the rest of the world, and they can follow. So that's a pretty audacious goal, right? But we have the people here to do it. We had the legislators to do it. We have the technology companies to do it. We have the people who believe in it, and it's a difficult path. I still don't know if we'll get there, but once again, leave it all in the field. But that's why I did it.
I love that, and of course, this area, this region, like you said, is the most supportive. Even in spite of the obstacles along the way, so you can't not try for it.
Exactly.
Right? So let's go back before you became CEO at El Paso Electric. So Tom was a great leader, someone that you were following and appreciated his values. What are the actions that you took? Did you advocate for the increasing roles, promotions to get to be a CEO? Did someone bring you along that path? What took you out of that eternal stagnation place into ultimately being the CEO?
So it's interesting. So many of us have had personality testing, whether it's Myers-Briggs or something else.
Yes.
Mine is that I don't seek to be the leader, but if I feel like there's no one else who's going to do what needs to be done, I will be the leader.
You fill in the gap.
So, and maybe if I took it again, they say you don't change, but maybe I've changed at this point. But what I saw was what he valued was so important. I wanted him to be successful. So I set out to be his enabler. He wasn't from the community. I thought there are different doors I can open for him. Did not cross my mind, and I know that's somewhat embarrassing to say, but I just want to be completely honest, that I would then become the CEO until he had been there a couple of years. And what I didn't know is he had begun very quietly looking at internal candidates, and I think it was great that he did it quietly, because you don't want to create tension between internal candidates, because that's not good for an organization. But he had been quietly looking at it, and I figured it out about the time he started giving me other things. So like human resources. Why should I have human resources? I have no expertise in this. I'm a regulatory lawyer. Why should I have safety? I don't have experience in this. And then more and more operations and regulatory other things like that. I could have thought, wow, they keep giving me more things and they're not paying me more. But instead I had an inkling, and it was a real privilege to be his successor.
That's such it reminds me when you have the ability to take on these different roles, even if it's for a relatively short period of time, to me that is the hallmark of being a great leader, being able to move into that CEO position, because you can at least relate to what those employees are doing, because you've managed that department or you've been in their world, even if it's for a short time.
Yeah.
So that's a good I think action item for emerging leaders to not stay in one lane. If you want to
Yes.
be a leader and expand your skill sets, being willing to move
Absolutely.
into
And
different
it's not
lanes.
even just the roles, it's also the tasks, right?
Yes.
The tasks that are scary and uncertain, and there's so many of those in today's world, right? But being willing to take those on.
Right.
If you do take on roles where it's not your area of expertise and you're going to supervise people whose area of expertise it is, that's when humility and listening are really important.
That is
Because
so
people
true.
will teach you so much.
Right.
If
right.
you're open
if
to
you're
it.
open to listening and being curious, like
Yes,
you said.
yes.
So, but it's hard to stay in this El Paso environment because I think it's
I love El Paso. So I love
know
talking
it is.
about it.
It's fabulous. Being in that male-dominated environment, what were some of the lessons learned in that experience? What did you take away that was positive being in that environment, and what were the things that you said, this is not how I want to lead or the environment I want to be in the future?
So I can even go back further in my career a little bit. When I first got out of law school, I worked for the interstate pipeline company, El Paso Natural Gas, very male dominated, back in the early 90s.
Yes, that was a
Interstate
time.
pipelines, it was a time. So one of the things that I found, and I hesitate to even say this because there is exceptions to every rule. Just like I mentioned, Tom is an exception to the rule. So I
Right.
don't want to just paint genders or sexes broadly.
agreed.
But in a traditional male-dominated environment, I feel like the culture is much more hierarchical, which I am not a hierarchical person. If you are a really hierarchical person, you will hate working for me. It will drive you crazy because I am not going to dictate what you have to do. And I found like there just wasn't a feeling of inclusion. And I don't know how to put my finger on it. Part is sheer numbers, right? But part of it was I felt as a woman and as a young woman that I was always smaller. Yes, I'm a physically small person. I recognize that. But I wasn't allowed to take up as much space in the room as the men. And I remember thinking, this isn't right, because going back to my parents were, very much feminist in addition to being
Right.
environmentalists. And so I hadn't been raised that way, and I thought, this is incredibly unnatural. And I remember thinking, this has to change someday. This has to change someday. Then I went on and had my daughter and took a year off and, went.
Sure.
But it's complicated. But I think I want to allow people to, one, bring their full selves to work, whoever that is, provided it's not abusive to other people or taking away from opportunities
Right.
for other people, but also just to feel like they're included, they matter. And that is great for the business, because then you have people with differing perspectives who are feeling safe to bring their full selves to work, talk about things, and that's how we solve these big, hairy problems.
So what would your advice be to someone who is in an environment where they're not allowed to take up the same amount of space? If you don't have a leader who is encouraging that, what would you say to someone who is in that situation?
So if it's only your, and I've been in this specific situation, if it's like your supervisor who's the issue, or your manager, and they're not going to change, it's good to try to move within the organization, right? Find someone else who is more open to what we would consider an appropriate way of leading. If you really think it's the organization, and this is a big if you have the privilege of being able to do so, because economically and for family reasons or whatever, you can afford to do it, you should try to find a different organization.
Right.
Because there are organizations that are never going to change. And why it goes back to the 10% of people who aren't going to change, right? Like
Right.
most organizations are going to be good because organizations are people. But that 10%, why would you waste your precious life on it unless you're stuck for a while? And then even then, try to be finding ways that over time maybe you can get out.
Right. I think it's interesting the difference between, as you were raised in a family of feminists, and so you instinctively knew that this didn't feel right, as opposed to someone who might be raised in an environment that either doesn't believe in that
Yeah.
or is more neutral and isn't coaching young women through that process,
Yeah.
and coming into a workspace where you might instinctively think, this isn't right, but I don't know what to do with it. So I
Yeah.
think it's a good reminder, finding where is the crack that could I move into a different place in the company, but there's also learning, and it does take time, but you can learn how to take up the space that you deserve.
Yeah,
you have to own what your energy is.
I love that you said that, and the point is take up the space regardless. Whether
Yes.
I don't know how to not take up the space in certain environments, that's going to get you in trouble. But you can't make yourself small. You can't make yourself invisible. Like I said, unless you have to do it to survive, which is a whole nother.
That's a whole other thing.
Conversation.
But allowing someone to make you smaller, that isn't okay.
No.
Or just believing that that's all you deserve.
Yeah.
That we do need to own our own space and trust in the energy that we bring to the workplace or the environment that we're in.
Absolutely.
Now, a legacy that you're creating is with more representative leadership at the table. And you elevated the first Black woman HR head as well as the first Latino CEO, again back in El Paso, recognizing that their individual value but also in the message of hope that it gives, which that struck me very powerfully. Tell me more about that message of hope and why does it matter in the workplace?
So touching back on the conversation we just had, when you're the only of whatever it is, or one of two in a group of 50, it's hard to feel like there's hope for you to succeed, right? Or if there are none. So when we can see people like ourselves in positions of power and positions of leadership, it gives us an example that's in the real world that shows us it can be done. So I think that's incredibly important. From a business perspective, I think the broader swath of people we look at to fill jobs, the better people that we're going to have. So you talked about Adrian Rodriguez, who followed me at El Paso, who was the interim president. He actually came up here to PSC for a little while and did some wonderful work here, and then left to a company called SPS to be their president. So he's back in Texas. But he's really one of the smartest people I've ever met, ever will meet, one of the most talented. And same with Kim Collier, who was actually my first promotion as an officer, and she happens to be diverse, and she's incredible, one of the most talented people I've ever worked with. So by being open-minded on things and just looking at humans as humans, we have better results in business. So it's just once again, it goes back to why for so long did we limit the funnel to white men, which we did with society.
Absolutely.
And I hope that it continues to get better.
And I do think that message of hope can be very subtle, but it can still be pervasive in the culture of your office, knowing that there's opportunity regardless of who you are.
And I think it's occupying the role and occupying the space. Because, for example, I don't want people to say, oh, she's the CEO because she's a woman. That is just the worst, right? Yeah. That's the worst. It diminishes all of us. But seeing that, wow, she's the CEO and she's a woman. Wow, I as a woman could do that.
Exactly, yes. Okay, now PSC recently announced a few exciting new partnerships, and I've been very interested in exploring this one with you. One is with clean energy, with a clean energy company, and another is with the Sounders FC, our soccer team. So I want to touch on those separately, but first I'd love to get your general perspective on the value of partnerships. And I know, as you've said, you're a big proponent of collaboration. So talking about the Seattle Sounders, that was just announced a couple of months ago. Sounders player Pedro de la Vega signed on to be an ambassador for the program, where PSE and Sounders FC have formed a joint activation team to educate customers and fans about PSE programs and services while integrating those Sounders theme activities and experience. So holy cow, that feels really groundbreaking to me, that you're using a player to be an ambassador for the company and then taking soccer to the fans. So tell me a little bit about how this partnership was formed, who reached out to who, how did this evolve?
So this is a great story, and it's also an example of how I, as the CEO, most of the good ideas are not mine, because this was not my idea. Yeah. I never would have thought of this, and I think it's phenomenal. It was really a combination of our government affairs folks and then our customer folks thinking that we wanted to do something innovative in a sport that crossed a lot of lines, right? Like we've talked
Yep.
about, it crosses gender, it crosses race, it crosses socioeconomic lines. We wanted to get outside the stadium, which I think is a really important part of it.
Yeah, and unique.
Yeah, and touch people's lives. So it was the Sounders, part PSE, part the Sounders. I mean, when you have good partners, you come up with really innovative things. So that's how it came about. And what's exciting to me is it allows us to reach all of our customers, right? Because we serve everybody. That's what you do when you have a dedicated service territory. We serve everybody regardless of their differences. And with this, it allows us to also bring information on some of our savings programs, energy efficiency programs, bill support, and to meet people where they are so that they don't necessarily have to think of coming to us. So I think it's wonderful.
That is, I think, really inspiring in so many ways, because we know that those programs have existed, and yet especially in this time when we're being inundated by messaging, to have someone that is in sports, that is maybe a celebrity of some sort, it captures people's attention, and they're willing to listen to these messages and perhaps have a real significant impact on their daily life to have this information. That's fantastic. So since we're on the topic of sports, tell me about your relationship with sports. Were you an athlete? Were you a fan growing up? Like, what was your relationship to sports?
Yes and yes. Through high school, I played 3 sports, one of which I was good at, tennis, one of which I was terrible at, basketball. I think I scored 2 baskets in 2 years. I spent a lot of time on the bench in that sport. But I've always just loved being on teams. It's funny, you mentioned earlier about me majoring in theater in college. I started out as an econ major, and I think I'm one class short of an econ major, much to my parents' dismay when I said, I'm changing to a theater major. But I think I actually started doing theater because I wasn't a traditional theater person, because I wasn't doing a sport in college.
Interesting.
So theater is also a team. Everybody has a role. Like, I like to direct, which maybe fits with being a CEO, but some people act, some people make sets, some people do costume design, some people do lighting, and it's very much a team endeavor. And it was only in thinking about this podcast today that dawned on me, because at Williams College, where I went, 40% of the students are varsity athletes because it's small. So you have to fill out all these teams, right? And so since I didn't play on a team, I think I found a different type of team, which was wonderful in its own way.
I love that you mentioned that you sat on the bench for one sport and were more active in another, because to me, that's the value that sports brings, because there are lots of times in life where you're sitting on the bench.
Yes, there are.
And you have to let others lead or take center stage, and then other times when you are in that center stage role. So, it's like I often have told interns in my organizations, if you really dislike this job or working in this organization, that is actually more information for you than if you loved it, as you are developing your path of where do I want to go in life.
Absolutely.
It's just so valuable to know, I don't like sitting on the bench, or I prefer to be on the bench supporting other individuals.
Yeah.
It really informs the path that you can take.
That is
career.
so interesting. So if I think about it, and I was pretty successful in tennis, I actually liked basketball more. Not because I like sitting on the bench, but I like the more team-oriented aspect of it, right? Because tennis, even though you're a team, it's kind of an individual sport, and I played singles.
As CEO, you factor in your employees, partners, stakeholders, and your customers, which I appreciate the Sounders partnership as a compelling way to focus on that customer engagement. Now, it's never easy to be beholden to so many people or different entities. How do you personally navigate the balance of trying to keep all these different stakeholders happy as often as possible?
I think rather than focusing on keeping them happy, I focus on what's the right thing to do. What is that path that creates the most fairness to everyone? Now, it can be tricky because it means none of your stakeholders are probably going to be super jazzed, right? Because I also have to take into account my investors, right? They put money into the company. They have to earn a return. But I think trying to just keep in mind that all stakeholders matter, Right now, I'm probably more focused, and it shifts kind of like who's your priority from time to time. Right now, I'm probably a little more focused on customers just because what we've seen with inflation, cost of living. I mean, Seattle, it's so crazy for me, especially coming from a place like El Paso and seeing how costs have increased over the last 6 years, given everything we're facing. So I think right now I'm really thinking, like, how do we stay on top of keeping costs down for our customers in light of the increases that we've seen for our clean energy transition, right? And in light of everything else that they're seeing, from the cost of eggs to the cost of gas to the cost of housing, how do we help?
So then talk about how you respond when things go awry. You have a big power outage, or you've got unhappy stakeholders. How do you navigate that side of it? What's your strategy?
So I'll use the bomb cyclone as an example that we had last November. I think it was our biggest storm in 20 years since the Hanukkah Eve storm, and most people tell me it was bigger. It's a different type of storm, so hard to compare exactly. We did a great job on that, and by we I mean our operations team, our communication team. We got people back much quicker than we had in the past. That said, for example, our customer outage app was not working, and it frustrated so many people, myself included. So you do a couple of things. One, you communicate a lot during the crisis. You let people know where you are. You don't create false expectations of what can be done, so you don't let people down. We actually did that, the wrong thing in one case in this. We said thought we would have most customers back by X time, and it took longer than we thought. So the second part of that is you always assess, like, how could we have served our customers better? What do we do next time? So of course you do a deep dive and a root cause, and you look at how you performed in that. In this case, we partnered with the Washington Commission to look at that. And while the outcome was really good, there are definitely things that we can continue to do better. But calm in crisis, focus on safety first, customers, take care of them, and then always be introspective and say, what can we do better? The other thing I would say in those situations is you rely on the experts. So when we actually get into an incident command structure, as we do in emergent situations, I am not the incident commander. So while I have a role to play, I am not going to be the person, making the final decisions on operational issues. So that's important to do too, is follow your incident command structure, which is probably more technical than you wanted, but it's super important.
No, I can relate to that very well. When I was the CEO of Seafair, during Seafair weekend, hydroplane races,
I can't
and
imagine
Blue
that,
Angels, and all of the things happening.
The big boom with all the boats
all
on
the
it.
log boom, and we would have an incident commander as well. And of course, my role became in support of the incident commander in the communication. Should something go awry, but it isn't. It's an interesting position when you have to shift your role into be one of support and not necessarily the lead. And in some, it actually is a relief, because I am not the expert as an incident commander of when a medical issue happens or it's something technical. So you actually do want to rely on those experts in that situation.
Absolutely.
So just pivoting off of power outages and things going awry, obviously the risk of wildfire just increases all of the complexities. Talk to us a little bit about where that fits into your world right now.
Wildfire is just front of mind for me from the moment I wake up in the morning till I go to bed, and sometimes while I'm asleep. So it is a huge issue for the entire country. I mean, we've seen wildfires in places we never would have expected, right? I actually joined the board of Hawaiian Electric 2 meetings before the Lahaina fire. Hawaii hadn't been considered, a high risk for wildfire area, but with climate change manifesting so quickly, lots of things are changing. But we've seen wildfires in Connecticut, New Jersey, Minnesota, places that Louisiana, places no one would ever think of it. So I think there's growing a recognition it's a national problem. So what we're doing is obviously hardening our system and doing a lot of things, including using AI and cameras and other things to help us predict weather, wildfires, keep track of things. But we're also having to prepare our customers when we do preemptive power shutoffs. And so that's a big undertaking, because some of our customers are on life support. So they need backup. So we have a program to help deploy batteries to them. Some folks probably myself included until about 10 years ago, didn't know how to open their garage door when the power's off, right? So we need to educate people on these things.
Sure.
We need to be able to set up, through one of our partners is a company called Fire Dog, set up, places that people can go to for information and cooling and charging their phones when we have to do these preemptive shutoffs. And also people are going to have to get more used to, unfortunately, more interruptions, because during wildfire season, it's debatable when that is, but we have a definition we use, we are putting our lines on not reclosing. So very, very sensitive settings that are actually kind of an anathema to what we do as utility people in terms of keeping the power on. We're having to keep the power off. And this is a huge thing for us culturally, and it's a huge thing for our customers, especially customers in rural areas and especially vulnerable customers. So this is part of what we're doing, but most important is for us just to do everything we can not to cause a conflagration, right? And it's extremely complicated with the drying of brush and tree health. That's another big issue here in the Pacific Northwest. Some of our trees may appear healthy, but inside they're not doing as well as they were.
Healthy.
So all of these types of things. I actually co-chair the National Utility Group's Wildfire Task Force, and we are trying to get some federal legislation passed to help us help our customers, whether it's better access to federal lands to do preventative work, whether it's an extension of FEMA, which is difficult right now, but that would allow us to recoup on behalf of our customers disaster dollars, some limitations on liability in exchange for filing a wildfire plan and following it, and then some funds. But so it's a work in progress.
Well, and meanwhile, as a company, you're going through a really significant transformation, especially considering what the company's 150 years old.
Yeah.
And I think that it's so challenging to not only go through this transformation, but also be in compliance with Washington's clean energy policies, which are some of the more ambitious in the nation. And you've said that you came to PSE because of this opportunity to lead the clean energy transition in one of the most forward-facing states in the nation. So how are you navigating that transformation in the midst of all of the changes in regulation, and also having this reputation, Washington's reputation as this forward thinking state? So how are you juggling all of those
So once
pieces?
again, it's a great team. So like on the operations side, my head of operations, she's head of energy delivery. Her name's Michelle Vargo. She came from Seattle City Light. She's a West Point grad who has built bridges under enemy fire. I mean, she is calm under pressure. She has a guy named Ryan Murphy who works with her and a whole wildfire team. I talk to them weekly about what we're doing on wildfire, and we talk to our board about it as well. But I know that she and her team have the expertise, in consultation with me, of course, to do what we need to do for our customers. So that leaves me more free to focus on some of the other things too. And I have a great team that's building clean energy. We have a wind farm in Montana. It's the first wind farm we've built in over a decade. It's going to come online in August. We're really, really excited about it. And for those of you who are worried about wind hurting birds, this is one of the exciting things about AI. There's some scary things, but we have a system on there called IntelliFlight that actually recognizes raptors like up to a mile away and shuts down turbines that are in their flight path, so that not entirely eliminating bird kill, but we're finding ways to help the wildlife, as clean energy takes up a lot of land and a lot of space that a lot of creatures rely on.
So we've talked a lot about your role in the workforce. Let's shift gears to talking about your role in the home. So you have 2 children. How do you show up for them in your household? And are there things that you help to develop in them to be leaders in their lives as they come into this world?
So I've also been a single parent most of my children's childhood, so that's a little bit of a different tweak on it too, because they're looking to you and not necessarily having someone to talk to say, what do we do in this situation? Although I have many friends who I talk to about that. I think your kids, and this is so banal, I shouldn't even say it, but I will. Your kids look at you, and what you do is how they're going to judge the role in the world that you play and whether that's a role they want to play. So I'm really proud of my daughter. She's 27. She's actually here today. She came back from New York where she's been living, and she's going to Stanford Business School in the fall. So
Good
I'm
for
really,
her.
really proud of her, because obviously she looked at me and she didn't say, boy, that's a terrible life. I want to run from business as much as I can. Instead she liked it. A story about Bryn that I think sums up how I feel about parenting. I have felt so guilty, once again, a woman thing. I know men do too, but I'm going to say it's a woman thing. I've had to miss so many things over the years, so many things. Or I couldn't bake a cake to take to the school event, so I took water, all these things that I thought, wow. So Bryn was when she was at Williams too, she was in a class, I think it was an anthropology class, and she said to me, the professor was talking about, familial roles, what people do, and she said there was a guy in the class who said, well, my mom stays at home because she thinks that's the best thing for her family, which is a great choice, a legitimate choice, and all good. And Bryn said, well, my mom is a CEO because she thinks that's the best thing for our family. And I thought, we as women, there's all kinds of choices we can make, right, on the spectrum and what we do. But I try to let them know, one, money isn't the end all. It's not. Most of us aren't going to be fortunate to become a CEO or a founder or whatever it may be. So you should do something you enjoy and that makes a difference to you along the way. And it shouldn't just be about good for yourself. It should be about the broader good, going back to what we talked about at the beginning. And it's actually a selfish choice because you'll be happier because of it, right?
That is so true. You will be happier. But I think that, kids are often told, just do what you love. And there's a process, though, of discovering what it is you love.
Right. Well, my kids also know you have to be off the balance sheet. I am not supporting you. So do what you love.
That's a motivator.
But you also have to be a productive member of society, whatever that means. Although I have to say, the world is so hard right now because with AI, for example, like I'm a huge proponent of technical educations, but now you see what's happening with coding and you're like, So I'm also a huge proponent of liberal arts education. So as I think of not just about my kids, but about future leaders, I think focusing on the things that make us human may be the best route to take in the long run, right? So things that where you have to be able to put disparate pieces of information together in a human way. Jobs where you have to interact with other human beings and bring them along. I think those are going to be the jobs that AI maybe takes last. I'm not going to say doesn't take, but it's a hard world for them out there. And so I think too, I've tried to instill in both my kids, in addition to you're off the balance sheet, I'm not supporting you for the rest of your lives, giving themselves a little grace too.
Yeah.
The oldest and youngest always have different interpretations of how much grace that is.
Yes, so true.
But you can't have expectations of yourself that you wouldn't put on someone else, and don't be too hard on yourself.
Well, and that grace that you encourage them to give to themselves, to me, that also includes the journey to discover what it is you love.
Yeah.
Because you don't very few of us come out of the gate knowing this is what I want to do, this is what I'm passionate about, and this is what I'm going to do the rest of my life. It's very rare that happens.
Absolutely.
So to be willing to experiment, to experience different things, sit on the bench, play in the game, try different career pathways until you discover either the thing or the components of the job that you love.
I love that. And that's also why I love liberal arts educations, because you get to take classes in so many things. The American model is so unusual in that way that you don't have to decide, when you're 17, I am an accountant. You can. Yeah. And there are people who are really happy doing that, but it's a different way of looking at the world. And I think it's the journey too, right? Yeah. As long as you can try to support yourself along the journey.
In the meantime, are there, having managed a lot of employees, are there skills or characteristics that you would encourage young leaders to, or young professionals to be acquiring or to be working toward?
Yeah, I mean, being able to relate and talk to other people like you and I are doing now. I think there's so many people spending so much time on mobile devices and digital devices and computers and all these things that it's important to spend time just sitting and talking. Now, for us, it's very comfortable because this is what we grew up doing.
Yes.
But for some of them, it's a more intentional act. The other thing, and I've told this to both of my kids, and so this is more for younger people, not who are already in their careers, but everyone should do a job in the service industry, at least one, because you learn so much about humanity doing that. You learn the good, the bad, the ugly, and you learn how you want to show up with other people, and not necessarily just people who are your waiter or your hotel desk clerk or the person at the makeup counter at the mall, but also just people who are your coworkers. And I think that's really important.
Could not agree more. So we always wrap up our episodes with what we call our game changer quick hits. So I want to make sure I learn this from you before we sign off here. Mary, who has changed the game for you the most, either personally or professionally, and why?
So there's three possible people. The first one's too easy. My mom and dad, we talked about.
Yes.
And the other one we actually talked about too. It was really Tom Shockley.
Yeah.
He made me discard certain stereotypes I had. He also showed me that you can be good and be a CEO and create a profitable enterprise and be honest. I'd probably been a little judgmental about most people in business before that, especially coming out of the FERC enforcement office, right?
Right.
So he really changed the world for me and made me realize you can do a lot of good from the inside, maybe more than you can beating your head against the wall from the outside.
Wow, that's a concept. I love that. And last question is, to be a game changer at its core is disruptive. You are going against the flow, you're swimming upstream, you're encountering obstacles and resistance. What has been your philosophy? What advice would you give someone who is in the proverbial stream, going upwards and hitting these obstacles? How would you encourage them to get past that and keep following that North Star?
Make sure that the North Star you're following is one that you really think is worth following. It's got to be one that you're willing to take the hits for. It's got to be ones that you're willing to leave it all on the field for. It has to be one that there are going to be people who don't like you for. So make sure that that thing matters so much to you that you're willing to deal with all of the difficulty and the uncertainty and losing some friends along the way, probably. Also making some friends. But you have to be confident in that you're doing the right thing.
Oh, thank you for that. Mary, this has been so lovely.
Oh, it's been so much fun. You guys made my
really
Friday.
enjoyed doing
Thank you.
this. Thank you.
Oh, likewise.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of We the Game Changers, a production of the Seattle Sports Commission with support from Metamora Productions. Please subscribe to We the Game Changers on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. From the Seattle Sports Commission, I'm your host, Beth Knox, and here's to the power of sports.